It's sometimes said that looking back in time is like traveling to another world. The reasoning and methods of our ancient ancestors are long lost to history, making some of the things they left behind grisly discoveries for modern humans. These are 5 scary archaeology discoveries. Number 5. The remains of the Altamura Man wouldn't look out of place on the site of a horror movie, and someone stumbling across it would think it was some creepypasta-inspired sculpture. But the methods that created this grisly image were completely natural. The Altamura Man was a Neanderthal, living in what is today northern Italy, between 128,000 and 187,000 years ago. When he was around 35 years old, the man was exploring a well or a borehole, likely attempting to collect water, and fell down a sinkhole into a limestone karst system. He became trapped there and unable to move, and likely starved to death. There he remained for almost 200,000 years through the rise and fall of multiple civilizations until cave explorers found him in 1993. The researchers discovered a 26-foot deep well with a tunnel at the bottom which branched off into multiple other tunnels. One tunnel was covered in stalagmites. In the corner was what looked like a piece of coral, but it was a skeleton. The Altamura Man's bones were fused with the cave walls that had trapped him, covered in a thick layer of calcite. Research on the Altamura Man was extremely difficult as scientists feared extracting the remains from the cave would damage them. Finally, in 2009, researchers were able to take a small piece of exposed bone and take it for analysis. The conditions the Altamura Man had been kept in made it one of the most preserved skeletons from its age, and provided scientists with valuable insight into the Neanderthals and their interactions with humans. As well as the age of the Altamura Man when he died, and how long he'd been trapped in the sinkhole, scientists were able to learn more about Neanderthals as a whole. The most peculiar discovery the Altamura Man had to offer didn't come from his DNA though, but from his face. When the skeleton was initially discovered, scientists couldn't determine whether he was actually a Neanderthal or if this was a specimen of another Homo species. The DNA indicated the Altamura Man was a Neanderthal, but laser scanning techniques that recreated what he looked like in real life showed a more muddled story. Factors such as the shape of the brow and the architecture of the cranial vault were more similar to another Homo species, a close cousin of the Neanderthal. It's possible the Altamura Man could be evidence of a transition between the two species. Number 4. When we think of creepy archaeology sites, we often think about ancient curses that strike down those that uncover long-lost tombs. But less often do we think of warnings about more natural devastation. In 2015, severe droughts hit much of Europe, drying rivers and causing water shortages inland. Agriculture was hit and forest fires became a problem. It's only thanks to mass globalization that food shortages weren't an issue. In July of that year, at the height of the drought, a strangely marked stone was revealed in the Elbe River in the Czech Republic. This is one of many hunger stones that lie in the river. Usually they're submerged, but in a time of drought when the river dries, they're visible, and etched into the stone is the year the water levels dropped low enough for it to emerge. Historians knew about the hunger stones before, but this specific stone was believed to have been lost. The Elbe River is a very busy waterway, and the stone was presumed to have been destroyed during modifications to the riverbed. The stone hadn't been recorded since 1983, and had marked on it only a few other years. However, the most eerie and the most famous hunger stone is not the one that was lost to time. The stone lies in Dessau, one of the oldest hydrological monuments in Europe. The oldest carving on the stone dates back to 1417, though it and the second oldest carving were made unreadable by anchors of ships that had sailed past in the centuries since it was placed. It's easy to see these as little more than primitive record keeping. Modern technology tracks the water levels of rivers around the world, and though droughts can cause serious issues, the records of those droughts can't really be called eerie. But it's important to consider what drove the people of the 15th century Europe to lay these stones. 600 years ago, conditions in what is now the Czech Republic were so bad that people suffering thought it was necessary to warn future generations of the peril. One of the stones bears an inscription written in German in the early 1900s. It reads, "When you see me, weep." It gives us a small insight into the devastation people were feeling at the time, and remains an ominous warning for us to try to combat the cause of the droughts. Number 3. Mass graves and ritual burial sites aren't exactly uncommon discoveries around the world. Sites, especially in the pre-colonial Americas, fascinate professional and amateur historians alike, partially because their practices seem so different to what we're used to, and partially because the exact details of the religious practices and belief of those people are lost to time. But one Mesoamerican gravesite shocked archaeologists excavating it between 2006 and 2013. The ancient village of Talpan is one of the earliest settlements in the area. It predates some of the biggest cities in the ancient world and most famous civilizations in ancient Mexico. The village would have thrived for around 500 years and was occupied in a time between two major periods in Mexican history, making every discovery there an important clue in understanding the history of the area. Archaeologists excavating the site found the mass grave of 10 individuals who'd been buried together sometime around 2,600 years ago. It wasn't clear how they had died, or even whether or not they'd been purposefully killed, but the matter of their burial was definitely purposeful. The almost intact skeletons were found on their sides, arranged in a spiral with their arms interlocked. This made it the most peculiar discovery from the day. The site of the burial is not uncommon, and there's little that archaeologists trying to reimagine the early society can refer to when trying to determine why these ancient people were buried like this. Our best guess at the moment is that it was some kind of ritual. The bodies were buried with some, but not many, grave goods, including stone and ceramic jars and bowls. The remains themselves belong to people of all different ages and genders, though the majority of the bodies belong to young people. The remains of a toddler and a baby are also included, leading some to suggest the scene was supposed to represent the progress of life, though what the ritual was for remains a mystery. It wasn't a practice that carried on into the major Mexican civilizations we think of when imagining pre-colonial Central America, and even then we cannot be sure the explanation for the ritual would have survived to modern day. Number 2. The discovery of 4 mummified bodies in Scotland in 2001 was an important enough discovery on its own. The bodies of a 3-month-old child, a young woman, an older woman, and a man were found beneath a prehistoric village in the foundations of a Bronze Age era row of terraced roundhouses. They were buried in the fetal position, which was common for bodies in the Bronze Age, but nothing else about them was typical. These were the first evidence of deliberate mummification in prehistoric Britain, making it a valuable discovery. But there was much more to these bodies than it first seemed. The bodies were not buried until around 500 years after their death. It's likely, not long after they died, they were placed in a peat bog for around a year, before being removed and brought back to the village. This alone isn't too unusual. It was actually common in some cultures around the world to have mummified bodies accessible for spiritual advice as a form of ancestral worship. They were likely buried hundreds of generations later when the beliefs surrounding ancestor worship changed and they were no longer necessary. However, archaeologists were most puzzled by the older woman's jaw, which didn't seem to fit the rest of her skull. DNA test proved the jaw didn't belong to the same person as the hip that archaeologists had used to identify the skeleton as a 40-something-year-old woman. It actually belonged to a man. The body identified as the older woman and that identified as the man were both made up of body parts from 3 people each, none of whom shared the same mother, put together to resemble 2 individuals. Like a lot of entries on this list, archaeologists are unsure why these Frankenstein monster-like bodies were created. The act was very deliberate, leading some to suspect it was part of a ritual. The act was mixing together lineages and could have represented the joining together of 2 important families in the village, or even joining together families from multiple villages. But some have a much less romantic view. If this was part of a ritual, it doesn't make sense for only the 2 older bodies to have been put together in this way. Instead, some believe the parts of the other bodies were simply used to replace damaged parts of the originals. Number 1. When archaeologists found an ominous black sarcophagus, the largest ever found in Alexandria, many expected there was something important or mysterious enclosed. The sarcophagus was found in July of 2018 and hadn't been opened since at least around 40 BC, the time of the infamous Cleopatra. That, along with its grand size, led many to suspect that this could have been the lost tomb of Cleopatra and Mark Antony, or Alexander the Great, who took over Egypt before Cleopatra's family came to power. The unsealed sarcophagus had no decorations and appeared to have no burial goods, but was buried with a large alabaster head, suspected to represent whoever was inside. For a while, the Egyptian government tried to keep the sarcophagus closed, which only added to the speculation. Even without opening it, most experts suggested this wasn't somebody considered of great importance at the time. The area was not exactly fit for a king. The black granite sarcophagus was likely much older than the bodies that it hid. Reusing sarcophagi wasn't unusual in ancient Egypt. Old occupants would be removed and new ones would be put in their place. Most believed that this was likely the case with whoever was buried here, though it wasn't until opening it that anyone could say with any certainty who was inside. The sarcophagus was opened a few weeks after it was discovered, much to the distress of those who believed a curse or plague would be unleashed. Inside was not a mummy. Instead, there were 3 skeletons lying in a pool of sewage water. Any grave goods they were buried with were long lost, possibly eaten away by sewage water, and only the skeletal remains survived the 2,000 years below ground. How the sewage water got into the sarcophagus is something those inspecting the tomb are still trying to figure out. It was completely sealed, so it seems unlikely this was simply groundwater getting inside the chamber. The other, more pressing question, though, was who these people were. The 3 skeletons are currently believed to have been ancient soldiers. This is because one suffered a blow from an arrow, so it's possible all 3 died in battle, though why they received this honor remains a mystery. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.